Right, so we go down to that the Yakia Shabbatera, the necessity to learn Torah. Dafka was struggling with demanding effort on the part of the Laim de Torah. We saw was not a tremendous bracha that the Zohar Kodesh tells us. Dafka through the effort in Torah, Daikinle, and Doshach in Vermilin, the Chuchmasa, Dafka come to the highest Madrega in Pnimius of the Torah, the Ayin Lo Yevosa, Lakim Shelasecha. But that's a Gili of Liosid Lova, that comes precisely through the Yinif and the Gia and struggle. In the Yinif and Torah, we brought the Kasha at some length from the the Tikkun Isaiah and the Yalkud, that the whole necessity for Yagia was a oinish, was a punishment that was brought into the world through Moshe Rabbeinu having hit the stone at Mei Maribo, and instead of speaking to it, and had he spoken to the stone, listen, you have to stop being busy with your hands, okay? You have to just look in the Sefer and listen like everybody else, and not. The Gemara says that the Yadayim Ashkonius hand, the hands are always looking for something to do. But the whole idea of Chassidus is to be Sheila Tal Inyonim HaTiviyim. So we have to control our teva, and we have to pay attention to the Mama and not fiddle around with our hands. Okay, so we saw that there was a kashya on the general principle presented by the Zohar Kodesh that Yagia in Torah was an oinish and a punishment to the Briyos, to the people of the world, which were hidden. But we all heard that it came through Moshe Rabbeinu having smit the stone at Mei Marivo. And how do we say that? Dafki through the Yinif and Yagia, we come to the Amitias, Hapnimias of the Hasoga in Torah, both in the actual Hasoga itself and in the ultimate Kavona of the Torah. Achainin hu. B'dugma kazeis anu meitzim beluchas v'sheinos beluchas achreinos. A similar example to this whole principle, that what seems to be a yerido and a oinish brought to a much greater aliyah ultimately, or not even ultimately, but in the thing itself, it brings to a greater aliyah. The hainu, that the hitting of the stone on Moshe Rabbeinu's part led to a greater aliyah. Then we find a similar in comparing the two sets of the luchos, which were given first the luchos Roshonos. They were given to the Yidden at Matan Torah, and then the luchos Shniyos were the second set of luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu gained after he went up twice, and then on the third time he went onto the mountain. At the end of that session, he was given the luchos Shniyos, the second luchos, which he brought down on Yom Kippur, on Yom or Macharas Yom Kippurim. He gained them on Yom Kippurim, and he came down with them on the morning after Yom Kippur. This is Mavur Barichas in the Meforshei HaTorah in Parsha Kisiso and in the Midrash Chazal. So we see that there's a luchos Roshonos, the first set of luchos, and we see there's luchos Acharonos, the second set of luchos, which were given on the mountain, albeit on Mount Sinai, but not at actual Matan Torah itself, but after a long period following the Chet HaEgel. Yeah, first of all, there was the sin of the golden calf, and then Moshe Rabbeinu went up to ask forgiveness, v'chulei. At the end, he was given the second set of luchos. Why did he need a second set of luchos? Because he personally broke the first set, as is well known, when he came down from the mountain and he saw the egel and the busyness of the Yidden with the height of the egel, that he broke, or he threw the luchos out of his hands, and he broke them tachas, and for that purpose it was necessary to give a second set of luchos, which had occurred in the way we just described. So we have luchos Rishonais and we have luchos Achronos. So the luchos Rishonais is referring to those that he received mamish at Matan Torah. Luchos Achronos to the second set after the whole series of further aliyos and the tshuva that Eden did in the meantime, and he's coming down on Yom Kippurim with the luchos. That's called the luchos Achronos. The Matan Torah hoyu b'madregas hatzadikim. That at the moment of Matan Torah, when Moshe Rabbeinu received the first luchos, then Yidden were on the madrega of tzadikim. Now, a tzadik means a person that is mushlam, he's complete in all inyanim of Avodas Hashem, including all inyanim of mitzvahs, and it's not shy by a tzaddik anything negative. He doesn't do, as is pointed out in Tanya and all the great Sfarim, that a tzaddik in the real sense doesn't do anything against Hashem Tzvuk Chas v'Sholom. He doesn't even do the smallest of it, even a Beinoni doesn't. How much more a tzaddik? In other words, that a tzaddik is somebody completely noki. He's clean from all possible stains that could be malim u'master legabi de gilel kuspe benafshoy. So therefore, Yidden, as they were at the moment that they received the Torah at Matan Torah, which means Mount Sinai the first time around, the actual giving of the Torah, they were on a level of tzaddikim. And how do we know that? How can we prove that the Yidden were all of them at that moment in a madrega of tzaddikim? The Yisrael sha'omdu b'mayim har Sinai posko zuhu mosar. That the Yidden, that they stood at the moment of the Ma'amad, that it got the presence of or the standing of Ma'amad Har Sinai, Poskazu Mosan, their uncleanliness, Suhuma means uncleanliness, ceased. Posko, it ceased to be. But the Gemara, that's a Gemara Masechta Shabbos, but the Gemara brings down over there that the Gemara makes a difference between Goyim and Yidden. The Gemara says that Goyim loy poskazu mosan. Goyim having themselves a certain inherent uncleanness or tumah, and Yidden, however, poskazu mosan Mount Sinai, the Kabbalas HaTorah, that when they received the Torah, poskazu mosan. So the Gemara says, what do we mean by the word zuhu mosan? Their uncleanliness. So the Gemara says that the Chet Eitz Hadas, when Adam Chava listened to the snake, to the primordial serpent, the serpent. So the serpent was matil zuhuma in Chava. What's going on at the serpent? He attempted, well, upon him, some way or another, he had relations with Chava, and therefore he was matili, he placed in her a trace of his tumah, because he was indicator of the koyach tumah, the nochash. So ever since then, all the people who descended from Adam Harishon and Chava, all of them had a certain trace of the uncleanliness or the tumah of the nochash in them. However, the Yidden that came to Mount Sinai, they received the Torah, Mount Sinai, that through the giving of the Torah, they lost that effect of the Nochash was posekmium, how do you call it, interrupted, or it ceased being in them altogether. But in all the Umas HaElam, the Goyim, that they're also from Adam and Chava, they didn't receive the Torah, and therefore the Zumas HaNochash remains in them. The Ilu Bayidin, it ceased to be in them. That's the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos. So now we see that the moment that Yidden received the Torah, they all became tzaddikim. In other words, that the pshat is not that they were tzaddikim before they received the Torah. Not that because they were tzaddikim, therefore they were given the Torah. On the contrary, they weren't yet completely clean when they received the Torah. But the Torah being given to them, milmaila, or that caused them to become clean. In other words, it was the Torah, milmaila, which cleansed them from the tumas nochash. Not that they were already clean when they received the Torah. In other words, it was, as we're soon going to be medactic, it was milmaila lamata. It was something that came from above downwards. That's what he teaches now, the Rebbe. The poskas umos v'hainu, and that means to say, al yidei gilui milmaila, shehoya meya gilui erein seif mamish lamata. That the mile of Mount Sinai was that there was a tremendous gilui from above downwards of Elikus. Kamoshakosu v'yered havaya al har Sinai. That the opening of Matan Torah in the Pesukim is the pasuk that the Eibishter came down on Mount Sinai. But that indicates that there was a yerida from Elikus, how he is muvdal completely and mufrash mi'olam, but that means mumaila. Vayered Hashem, he came down and he allowed himself to be revealed on the actual har in the Gashmis Oilam, how it was har Sinai. So that tremendous coming downwards of the Shem Havaya, the Eibishter, how he is, Shem Havaya is well known, that's the Shema Atzmi, that's the emerson name of the Eibishter. The Eibishter came down on Mount Sinai in that particular way. V'ali deizeh poskas umasa. Dafki through the fact that Elikus came down, Mamayla Lamata, that's what caused them to lose their Zehuma, which had come into them from the Nochash. That wasn't in their own power, it wasn't their own avoider. It was mamish from above downwards. In other words, that al yedei, what the Eibishter appeared in the way he did to give them the Torah, well, that's what caused them to lose their Zehuma. They already lost the Tumah from the Nochash, so that when the Torah actually was given to them through Moshe Rabbeinu and the revelation of Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, then they were already pure. They'd already lost by the etzem appearance of Elikus al Hahar. Well, that had already caused them the union of loss of all Tumah, and therefore they were on the Madrega of Tzadikim, boys Harega, and they actually received the Torah. And that's one of the biurim in the famous piece of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Well, it's one on towards the end of the Haggadah. We say the whole piece. When I say towards the end of the Haggadah, I mean before the actual completion of the Haggadah per se. Then we say this whole series of dayanos. We say if the Eibishter had only done that, then dayano. If he'd only done that, that would have been enough. That would have been enough. So it's written that Ilu Midanu Lifnei Har Sinai dayano. If he would have brought, if he would have just brought us to Mount Sinai, he wouldn't have given us the Torah. Dayeno, that would have been enough. So everybody said, how would that be enough? He brought you to Mount Sinai and didn't give you the Torah. What's the mile of coming just to Mount Sinai without receiving the Torah? So therefore, one of the biurim, one of the pshatim, and that is that when the Yidden came mamish to Mount Sinai, at that moment, then the Eibishter appeared on the mountain. That already caused them to lose their Zehuma. The fact that the Eibishter appeared on the mountain even before he'd given them the Torah. There was already the union of Posca Zuhumoson, and that was a tremendous union. That kilo would have been Dayeno, I feel he wouldn't have given us the Torah. Amamila Nimtzal, if you say, that what they were tzaddikim at the moment of Matan Torah wasn't their own avodah. No, that was the Alidei Gilel Elikus, Bahar Sinai, and that caused the pasika of the Tumah. Ki meloya b'koyach atzmon ki im milmayla. V'hagam diksiv. It's written l'chera. We can ask on that a kasha that it's written ki barach ha'om. At the beginning of Pasha Bashalach, it's written that the Eden fled from Mitzrayim, and that Pari was told by the Mitzrayim, Ki borach ha'am, vayu gad Pari melech Mitzrayim, Ki borach ha'am, that the Jewish people had fled. So the fact that they fled is one on the famous Shaila. Why did they have to flee? The Abish had already smitten the Mitzrayim with the Machas HaBechoros, and they were completely out, the Mitzrayim. They'd had it. Even to the point that Pari, in Pasha Boy, it's written that Pari came to the Eden and he said, Su maher mizeh, get out of here, you guys. We can't take it anymore. It's absolutely beyond our koiches anymore. So why is it written that they fled the Eden? They didn't have to flee. They could have just walked out. And on the contrary, in another pasuk it's written that they did. Ki yotzu b'nei Yisrael b'yod Roma, that they went out with a high hand. They went out with a, like Rashi brings over there, the Gevura before Semes, with a tremendous brand and a koch. They went out of Mitzrayim. And yet, nonetheless, it's written when the Mitzrayim told Pari what had happened, then it's written Ki borach ha'am, that the Eden had fled. It's a sign that they fled. What did they need to flee for? Everything was ideal for them just to go out and march out with a tremendous triumphant, which in a way they did. So why do we call it that? Nonetheless, it was that they fled. So everybody's familiar with that famous kasha, with that Alter Rebbe in Perek Lamed Aleph in Tanya. But the Alter Rebbe brings in detail of that whole kasha in Perek Lamed Aleph in Tanya, and he says that they didn't flee because of Pari. Pari had no brera. He had to let them go. And what did they flee from? They fled from the Ra. They fled from the evil which was still in them. Mitzad, the whole contact with Mitzrayim, 210 years you've been in Azar place. Like Mitzrayim, then as they say in Yiddish, it's klept up too. Things stick on. You get all sorts of andazar, burinyonim, from the Goyim and from the Avir Goyim, v'chule. And that the Eden fled from the Ra which was in Benafcho. The Ra that they had in themselves, B'pnimiyas, through the Dveikis mit the Mitzri, from that they fled. That's the emes of Pshat Ki Borach Ha'om. Not that they fled from the Mitzrayim, they fled from the Ra that they had, B'pnimiyas, Benafcho. So the Alter Rebbe said to the Rebbe, if they fled from the Ra, then they left the Ra behind already when they left Mitzrayim. Then why do you say that Poskazu Moso Malidei Milmaila by Matan Torah, they'd already fled away from the Ra themselves? So they didn't have any Ra. What did need to be Poska? The Matan Torah. So that was the Alter Rebbe. Even though it's stuck here, we're told that they fled from the Ra, which means they'd already left behind the Ra, it would seem. Says the Rebbe, Shebarchu min hara, they fled from the evil, not from the Mitzrayim, but they fled from the evil. Hari ho yozeh b'pchinas iskafia levod, okameisha kosa b'sefer shel beinanim, as the Alter Rebbe is mavai over there in the continuation of his words. The Alter Rebbe is masbid that what they fled from the Ra doesn't mean that they left the Ra behind completely, but on the contrary, if you just flee from your Ra, then all you do is just in a way leave it the way it is, but you just push it away for the moment and clear out. But to a certain extent, the Ra is going to chase after you and come back. You've got to have a much deeper approach to completely get rid of it. So that was the Alter Rebbe, but that's what we call in Siddusis Kafia. Not that you've really got rid of the Ra, or that you're just, as it were, pushing it aside in order to get away. In other words, when we say they fled from the Ra, then we don't mean that they fled physically, that the Ra is here and they fled somewhere else. No, we mean in Ruchnias there. That means that really the Ra was still there, but they were fleeing from it. They were trying to leave it behind. What that's the Indian of his kafia, meaning that somebody fights the evil, but he hasn't completely reversed it to good, or he hasn't completely ridded himself of it. Yeah, therefore, the Ra is still there, even though you fled from it. On the contrary, fleeing from it, it doesn't really solve the problem in the ultimate said. So that was, says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, that they fled from the Ra, but nonetheless, that was only a b'derech iskafia, meaning that the Ra was still there. V'gam, and in addition to that, b'sfiras ha'omer, yodua she'abiru hu b'chinas iskafia, chulu. Ki im על ידי הגילוי מלמעלה, על ידי זה פוסקה זו מוסר. The Alter Rebbe says another Indian, that there was Sfiras ha'omer prior to Kabbalah Satorah. You might say, well, wait a minute, what sort of Sfiras ha'omer was there before Kabbalah Satorah? They only received the mitzvah Sfiras ha'omer at Kabbalah Satorah. So what does he bring in Sfiras ha'omer before Kabbalah Satorah? So everybody's familiar with the famous Teretz Alzeh. There's a famous run at the end of Masechta Pesachim where he writes in reference to the mitzvah from Sfiras ha'omer, and he brings a medrash over there that even before Matan Torah, when Eden left Mitzrayim, they counted the days before they got to the actual giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and that was like a form of Sfiras ha'omer, even though it wasn't the Etzem mitzvah sasei min ha'Torah for Sfiras ha'omer, because that was only given at Matan Torah. And the Ran writes over there, B'Shem HaMedrash, that Moshe Rabbeinu told him that the whole purpose of them leaving Mitzrayim is in order to receive the Torah. And therefore they were counting the days from back to front. They're saying, oh, it's only 50 days until we're going to receive, now it's only 49. In other words, they were literally counting, or it could be that Moshe Rabbeinu told them, okay, you guys have got 50 days, and then on the 51st day or 52nd day, there's going to be the giving of the Torah. So they were counting from the beginning, like we count. Meaning that there was already a mi'ain of the mitzvah of Sfiras ha'omer even prior to Matan Torah. So that's what the Alter Rebbe mentions Sfiras ha'omer. But, however, he said that it's well known that Sfiras ha'omer is a preparation for the receiving of the Torah. And that's the pshat of the word Sfiras ha'omer, as it brought down in Ayom Yom, that Sphira is from Russian sapir, a beautiful stone, and Oimer is a offering which was brought in the temple from oats. It was made out of corns, called corns of oats, and oats is a Michael Behema, as is well known, and therefore it's connected with the birur of the Nefesh HaBahamiyas. So we see that first of all they ran away from the Ra, and then during the preparation, which they had already, ain of Sfiras ha'omer. Sfiras ha'omer has also got to do with the union of preparing and purifying yourself, your nefesh HaBahamiyas, in order to receive the Torah. So no doubt, if they already had a me'ain of the mitzvah, then they were busy with that. Says the Alter Rebbe, it's well known that the union in Ruchnius of Sfiras ha'omer is also be'ikah, only b'derech iskafia. It's already a birur, it's a purification and a separating off of the evil from your nefesh HaBahamiyas, but once again it's only b'derech iskafia. Anyway, I'm told, so I left it on my desk. It's on my desk, and you'll see it's written there, Robert Bolton. Have you got a key? You have a key to the office? I'm sorry, I really apologize. Anyway, the inyan from Sfiras ha'omer is already a birur. And what a birur means, like a separation and a purification. But once again, it's a birur b'derech iskafia. It's only pushing the Ra down and trying to be mevatel the koyach hara in order that you should be able to move further towards Kabbalah Satorah. It's not a complete riddance of the Ra, or it's not even a union of a high birur in the Ra. It's dealing with what you might call the Nefesh HaBahamiyas front on. Mamira, therefore, he doesn't completely free himself from the Ra of the Nefesh HaBahamiyas. And that was the Rebbe, even though they went through certain Avedas before they got to Matan Torah. First of all, they went through the whole union of Baruch HaOm. That was a special union when they left Mitzrayim. And then there was a further union of Sfiras ha'omer. Nonetheless, all that was in the form of iskafia, and therefore the ikar losing the Zehuma, the Ika cleansing of themselves from the Zehuma, is dafkit through that Gilui, or that revelation of Elikus Milmaila. In other words, that it was all done Be'ika by the Eibishter, by the Gilui of Elikus Milmaila Lamata, Shahoya Meya Gilui Oirein Seif Mamish, Lamato, meaning from above down into the world of Kamesha Kosu. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, I was reading a couple of lines earlier. Agam B'Sfiros Ha'ima Yadua Shabiru Hu B'Prinus Iskafia. Kiyim, the whole Indian B'Matan Torah was Alidei Agilu Milmaila. It was all through the revelation of Yered Havayal. Sinai Alidei Zeh Poskazu Moson. Through that they lost all traces of the effect of the Nochash. They lost all traces of the Indian of the Nochash. Parega, that they actually received the Torah, Im Kain, they were completely and utterly clean. And that was the necessity for the Eibishter to, as it were, appear Mamish Lamata on Mount Sinai. That's Kilo, not just a Indian that the Eibishter had to come down in order to give them the Torah. On the contrary, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu went up. Moshe went up to a certain extent. It's brought down, he had a very high aliyah, Moshe Rabbeinu, in order to receive the Torah. The whole actual appearance of the Eibishter, Kaviyohu personally, Vayir Ravaya, Al Sinai Mamish Lamata, that was a preparation to free the Yidden of all trace of any shemetz of the tumah of the Nochash, so they should be able to be Makabel the Torah B'Tachlisa Tahara V'Hanakiyus. That's why the Haggadah Shel Pesach is right when it says that Kilu, we just stood before Mount Sinai. That would have been enough, because that was a special Yerida on the part of the Eibishter Mamish into the Lamata in order to purify the Yidden from any trace of previous impurity which had been there mitzad the effect of the Chet Eitzah Da. Sure. So, but Rega Ahu, Yidden were in a tremendously high Maila and Madrega, and therefore they received the Torah. With all the Nisim and with all the Nyonim of Gil Elikus that were B'Shas Matan Torah. And when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchas Rishonos, we're going to see now tremendous milas that there were in those Luchas, because those Luchas were given at that moment of tremendous auspicious, as you might say, tremendous auspicious moment to give the Torah to a completely pure people called the Yidden. However, through the chait of the ego, then it came back. The Zehuma returned. The Zehuma came back into the Yidden. Since it came back, then the first luchas were broken. They were no longer able to be given to the Yidden. They were no longer on that madrega that they could take those luchas. And then began a whole attempt on the part of Moshe Rabbeinu, a whole aveda on the part of Moshe Rabbeinu to ask the Eibishter for forgiveness and to bring the Yidden to tshuva, to ready them for a new receiving of, as it were, Matan Torah, a new receiving of a new set of luchas, and that took place quite a long time later at Yom Kippurim. Says the Rebbe, the fact that it returned, that made a whole new type of Aveda necessary, and the ultimate upshot of it was the Luchas HaAchreinos. So now from that it appears that the Tumas HaNochash returned after the Chet HaEgel. Well, if you look in that Gemara, it's very interesting. In that Gemara that we just quoted, what's written at Poskazum Oson, although the Gemara doesn't say that after they sinned in the Chet HaEgel that it came back. Statements in the Gemara does. On the contrary, the Gemara says, how do we know that by Yidden Poskazum Oson, V'ilu Eitzel HaOkum Loi Poskazum Oson? But the Gemara says that Yidden lost their tumah at the giving of the Torah, or the goyim that didn't have the giving of the Torah, they still have their zuma. Well, from that it's mashma that it's an ongoing thing that the Yidden lost their tumas anochash by Matan Torah, and that's the difference between Yidden and the goyim, and that's the simple mashmois of the Gemara. And yet here the Rebbe says no, al yidei the Chet ha'egel, it came back, the whole Zuma came back, and the Gemara is talking, the Gemara was written and was brought into the world a long time after the Luchas, Achreinos v'chulu. In Cain, how come the Gemara makes it appear that Matan Torah, B'pam Rishona, they lost their Zuma. So there's a whole footnote from the Rebbe about that. But the Rebbe says, the Rebbe writes that it appears in certain places in the Zohar Kodesh that the tumah of the Nachash did reoccur after the Chet ha'egel. However, in the Gemara it's not much more like that. However, we have to say that it's only a partial return. It's not a complete return to the state that it was prior to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And what the Gemara means is that there's became a difference between Yidden and Goyim. That's to say that alaf, by Yidden there was a certain return, even if we'll say afilatim tolema, that there was a certain return of the Tumas HaNochash after the Chet ha'egel, but nonetheless compared to Goyim, the Yidden and Azam Madrega what they considered it Poskazohu Masa. But when they get to the Amiti, so Indian, Alidei, what they sinned, such a major sin of Avodah Zarah, but Tzibur, but Kol HaOifen V'Desgiven. But the Chet ha'egel, well, that caused a return partially of the Indian Tumas HaNochash, that should require a new bureau. It's not complete like it was B'Shas Yetzias Mitzrayim, but Achaponim, it's enough to require a new type of avodah and a new type of bureau. And that's what he's now going to describe, that there was a necessity for a new Indian altogether. And then after that they were given the Luchos Achreinos Alidei Tshuva, precisely through the union of Tshuva. Ta'ochein nitnu b'yoyim Kippurim yoyim Tshuva v'yoyim Shlichas Ha'aveinah. And the first said the Rebbe, the union of the second Luchos, the Luchos Achreinos, were received by Moshe Rabbeinu precisely on that day of Yom Kippurim. Now once again, Matan Torah hadn't been yet. And since Matan Torah, well, I don't mean it had been, so I mean it was already given, but they didn't really have the whole meaning of the Torah yet until Moshe Rabbeinu came down. So in a way, Yom Kippur wasn't really known, Begodoi, as a clear halacha to you. However, said the Rebbe, the fact that Yom Kippur is the day of Slichas HaAveinos, well, that means, and it's also mashma in certain places, even as a Tosfos in Masechta Brachos, that the bris that Avraham Avinu made with Yitzchak, with himself and Yishmael and the whole household when he made the bris milah the first time, that was on Yom Kippurim, which means that there was a certain knowledge that there's a very high day in the year where it's a day that you can, as it were, correct everything and get closer back to Hashem. In other words, that even though Yom Kippur with all its halachas hadn't actually been given as a permanent halacha to the Yidden Alidei, the teaching of all the halachas of Matan Torah, he hadn't been able to do that yet, Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, nonetheless, the Maila of Yom Kippurim was already there in the world. It was already a door. And therefore the Eibishter chose at that particular moment to give him the Luchos Achreinos, and the next morning he appeared down from the mountain, Macharas Yom Kippurim, with the Luchos. And therefore, said the Rebbe, we see that there must have been an avodah of tshuva which preceded the giving of that Luchos. In other words, that Poskazu Matzon at Mount Torah, but it came back again, at least partially, at least enough to bring them back into the gather of needing to be repurified, and so therefore they had to have the union of of tshuva. They started a new inyan in the world that if you were neiful into inyanim not the way they should be, then you have to correct it through your own avodah. What that's the inyan of tshuva, and therefore the second luchas were given on that day, which is the day of tshuva, and it's the day as the result of tshuva. It's a day which brings the result of tshuva, slichas ha'avenos. It brings also that's the day that the Eibishter forgives. Well, if we say he forgives, then that means it must come from a very high madrega, because if he told in the Torah that you're not allowed to do certain things, and then he forgives that, it's a sign that he's gone much higher, even in the Gila of Torah, in order to forgive. So therefore, that was the Gilui that occurred at that moment of the Luchas Achroinos was a inyan which came mitzad tshuva, which itself is a very unusual avodah by a mensch, and it brought out milmaila the inyan from slichas ha'avenos. But that's also a very high madrega, as we pointed out. It's like the Eibishter himself goes beyond his own rulings, as it were. And that brought the gilui of the luchas achroinos. It's a tremendous, auspicious moment. Why didn't they go back exactly to how they were right from the beginning? Im kol zeh loy poskezu mosa. With all those tremendous milas, with the fact that they did tshuva, and with the fact that it was a very high tshuva that brought slichas or avenos, and it was given on Yom Kippurim, which is the day of the Gilui of that very high madrega, nonetheless, it wasn't enough to completely re-drive away or re-cleanse them from the original Zohuma, which returned at the Chet HaEgel. The Tzrichim Achachach, birur. And therefore they still need, after that, Ayin shall birur. In other words, with all the tremendous effort that Moshe Rabbeinu made, and all the prayers that Moshe Rabbeinu offered, and then he brought the Yidden to tshuva, and then they did tshuva. Well, that's the whole mile of Rosh Chodesh Elul. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu went up the third time on Rosh Chodesh Elul. It's all in from blowing shofar. That before he went up, he blew the shofar. It was the whole camp, and the whole big arichas ha'inyonim. The Yidden came into a whole inyan from tshuva, and therefore they were zeicher that luchas achroinos were given, and they were given to re-correct the whole situation. And it was on Yom Kippurim, else tremendous inyonim, but it wasn't enough to drive away again the Zohuma. In other words, it wasn't compared in pure Gilui Elokus to that Gilui Elokus that there was B'shas the Luchas HaRishonos. Because B'shas the Luchas HaRishonos, the Gilui Elokus was so much that it just drove away the Zohuma, B'ifim Shel Poska Zumasa. Here, it didn't do that. What that means is that we're now got a situation where the Tumah came back through the Chet HaEgel, the Torah has been given, and it was given with a tremendously high Nasinas Koyach, as you might call a very high giving of strength from a very high Madrega. V'afal pikein, it's not enough to return the whole situation to the matzav that it was Beluchas HaRishonos, which means that we've got Yidden have received a tremendously high level of power, as you might call Velakus, in Torah, but they still are in a state where the Zohuma is still there. What that means, we have to say, that the giving of the Torah the second time round was to help them with that birur. It's going to take a long time. It's going to not be something immediate, but the whole giving of those Luchas Achroinos was in order to help them do themselves this famous birur, this famous idea of cleansing of the self, which would bring them eventually again to Poskazu Umosa. But that's going to have to be in a even of birur milmata lamaila, and that was the inyan of the giving of the Torah in the Luchas Achroinos from such a high madrega as Yom Kippurim. So we see tremendous powers, tremendous koiches given in the Torah, of a need for a birur. There's a matzah where things, mitzad Yidden, are no longer in a state of absolute cleanliness, or there's a need for birur. Umikol mokim, and yet nonetheless, what Lafi Zekum is, that the whole inyan of the Luchas Ha'achroinos a giving of a possibility and a koyak that you should be able to be mavarer a negative situation, which means that they're not on the same level. Beklal as the luchas are shein is what they're in. It was gila lakus mamish, so even that it just that he could cleanse the whole world, absolutely what about the whole world, but auch upon him it cleansed Yidden and the world in a way that they wouldn't have to be mavarer the world. So, from that it would seem that the Luchas Achreinis are a lower level than the Luchas Rishonim. And nonetheless, says the Rebbe, Omru Razal b'Medrash Rabbah. It's a statement in the Medrash, Pasha Tisor, that's in Pasha Kisisor, near the end of Shmois. Reish Perik Memvav at the beginning of chapter 46 in the Medrash. Ha hu diksiv, that is what is written. Vayaged lecha ta'alumeis chachma ki kiflayim letushiyah. Now that's a pasuk in Yoav. That's a pasuk to one of the famous Job's comforters, the people that came to argue with Yoav when he was so embittered and he was saying things not nice about the Eibishter, Chas v'Shalom, all sorts of things. He was so embittered that he spoke out his heart in a very not proper way. And so it came on these Job's comforters and they tried to correct him and put him back. So therefore, one of the comforters says to Eoy, after he's heard him say his bit, then he says, you have to realize that the Eibishter can give you, he can tell you, Vayaged lecha ta'alumeis chachma, he can tell you hidden things in chachma, deep and hidden secrets of wisdom. Ta'alum is from the word helem. Helem means something hidden. Ta'alumeis chachma. Ki, why would he do that? Ki flyim letushia, because he wants to double your good abilities to find the right, what you might call etor. Because the word tushia is an interesting word. The word tushia can sometimes mean weakness or inability, and sometimes it can mean etor, or practical good advice to avoid difficult situations for chulam. That can be the word. So here it would seem that the Medrash is teaching the word tushia in the sense of like a doubled form of etor, ability to find the right way and the right way out of difficult situations. So therefore, that's what this comforter of Yoav, that's what he said. Omalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe. What's that got to do with us? So the Eibishter said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Al titztaer al haluchos harishonos sheshibarta. Don't be upset about the first luchos that you broke. Shelo yehoyu ela asheres hadibros levad. They were only the 10 commandments. Ubeluchos hashniyim, and in these luchos hashniyim, in these second luchos, ani noisen lecho sheyeh bahem medrash v'haloches v'agadetes v'chulos. In other words, the Eibishter said to Moshe Rabbeinu to, as it were, make him feel better, to put him right. So the Medrash tells in detail over there, what happened when Moshe Rabbeinu came into the camp and he saw the whole Chet HaEgel, and he didn't throw the luchos until he'd seen it. So the Medrash of the Eibishter already told him that things were very bad down there. Why didn't he just throw the luchos away right up there on the top of the mountain? So the Medrash says a fascinating halacha. The Medrash says that a dayan cannot paskin just from what he hears. He must see the actual thing, or he must hear, kosher 80 from 280. He can't just go, even if the Eibishter tells him, he can't just rely on that. He's got to, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu never threw away the luchos till he actually saw with his own eyes what was going on, and then he threw away the luchos. There's a whole big reasons about that. Then it's written all of a sudden that Moshe Rabbeinu was tremendously upset, and he said, the Yidden are in such a mess, and I've broken the luchos, you know. He said, we're both of us been guilty, as it were, of terrible negative things. They're serving a way to Torah, but at least they've got me to ask for forgiveness. He said, who's going to ask about me? Who's going to pray for me? I've broken the luchos. So, written that the Eibster heard him say that, and the Eibster came along and said to him, Moshe, don't be mitztayer that you broke the luchos. Don't be mitztayer. In other words, that the comfort that he gave to Moshe Rabbeinu was be'ikar b'negeh to himself. He said, don't worry, because in the first luchos there was only 10 commandments. Now you're going to get gadatas and halachas and medrashim and achayis. You're going to get all sorts of inyanim. Ad ein shir in Torah that you never would have had. Only mitzad the luchos harishonos you would have had 10 things altogether, 10 statements. And the Gemara says in Masechta Nedarim, it would have been a little bit more. It would have been safer Yoshua, which tells how they conquered Eretz Yisrael. But that's all. That's all they would have got.
They wouldn't have needed it.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. But in the meantime, the Eibster is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, look at what you got here. There you only got, you only got a sales. But look at all that you've got here. So that's what we're going to teach. What does that mean? What is the mile of all these medrashas, halachas, and all those, inyan. And therefore, that's what the Rebbe quotes, that the Eibster said, Al titztayer. Don't be worried about was it with the Yidden? So it's mashman, and from that there'll be all these inyanim, halachas, agadatas, and all these tremendous additions in the quantity of Torah that have come about. That'll automatically fix the Yidden as well. That'll be their tikkun. So therefore he said to him, Al titztaer al luchos harishonos, with the whole arichas, but he said, in these luchos, I'm giving you all these extra inyanim in Torah. Ulachayra said the Rebbe, Einoi Muvan. Well, that's not to be understood. Haloi aluchos harishonos hayu b'vadai gevoyim b'madrega. The luchos harishonos must have been much higher in their madrega than the luchos. We already were medactic that. We could always see that the luchos harishonos came to correct a situation which didn't exist by the luchos harishonos. There was no zuma anymore by the luchos harishonos. But that already indicates that the luchos harishonos came in order to be metaking something more than what the first ones did. And so the Rebbe said, we have to say that we can prove but pashtas that the luchos harishonos must have been much higher than the luchos harishonos. So what does he comfort him with the luchos harishonos? What's his comfort? He said, Al titztaer, you got all these inyanim. All right, we got all those inyanim. But those inyanim indicate a necessity and a yerida in order to be metaking something l'choira. And the luchos harishonos were a much higher gila of elikus. So what's the Eibster comforting Moshe Rabbeinu with the luchos harishonos and telling him that you got all these extra things? What does that help if they're lower in madrega than the luchos harishonos? And therefore he said, how do we know that the luchos harishonos were on a much higher madrega? That over there in the Gemara in Masechta Eruvin, it's written clearly over there, that had the luchos not been broken, ilamole means had it been that knot, had it been that knot, if it would have been that the luchos hadn't been broken, then the Torah would never have been forgotten, meaning there would never have been any shichachah. Just imagine that, you would have learned Torah and you would have eternally remembered everything you learned. You would have never had any shichachah. So I see only one person grinning with a particular thirst and pleasure on his face, that would have been tremendous. But everybody else just seems to remain in the same Fashlovenkeit that they were a regular nature. But anyway, the luchos harishonos, if that would have been the case, then lo nishtachacha, and then v'lo yehoyu uma v'loshen sheiletus pohem, and no goy or no language, meaning people who speak a language, meaning like a goy or a people, would not have been able to have any control over you. There would never have been a God. There would never have been such a thing that any people would rule over you. Now the truth of the matter is, that's two different statements in the Gemara. It's interesting, the Rebbe links them together. It's two different Bali members, two different Mani Omar, but they both teach a similar pasuk, but each one learns it in a different way. But nonetheless, the Rebbe brings them as a hemshel, one to the other. We have to say that he learns that even though it's two separate opinions in one pasuk, but that's usually what we call our machlokes, we have to say that the Rebbe holds that there's sometimes in what appears to be a machlokes, it's what we call ma omachada v'loy pligay. That sometimes they learn the pasuk different, but they just mean to say two different inyanim, but not too different. They just want to say that if you learn the pasuk that way, then you can be megala another inyan, but that's not bestira to the first inyan. Just that it was said by another man d'Oma. It wasn't said by the first man. And so those two statements are really two differing statements, touched in the same pasuk. But we have to say that the Rebbe learns it that way. Meaning that we see that the Maila, the Luchos Rishonos, is that there would never been any negative thing. If you learned Indian Torah, it would have just become part of you forever. You would never have lost any influence of that Indian Torah, and that would have given Yidden such a such a premier state in the world that every Ummah would have just been bottled to them. There would never have been any possibility that another people could have any shlita or hold over it behind them. Why is that? Because the Luchos Rishonos were all what you might call face. V'yadua the shichko he miprinus achurai. V'leyesh hoyu kulei ponim lezeis lo hoyu shichko klal. The Rebbe says it's well known that the Luchos Rishonos kulei ponim. Does anybody know what that means in simple terms? That they were all literally face on? That's what it means. Ponim means literally face on. Does anybody know what that means in Pashtas? Come on, you guys, use your cups.
Every way you look.
Yeah, very nice. That even when you engrave something into a stone, the way you're engraving it, it reads this way. But if you look at it from the back, it reads the other way. It's back to front. So the mile of the Luchos Rishonos was that whichever way you looked at them, from back or from front, they read the same way. In other words, there was no, what you might call, back exit area to them. They were all kulei panim, meaning that they were all face against face. And so the word panim, as well known, is from the word panimius. The word panim indicates a mila, that your face is the gila of your etzem. The way you look at things, the way you appear in front of people, well, that's your panimius. That's from the word. That's why your face is called panim, because panim means panimius. It means the inside of you, literally. That's what it means. Well, panim means that you look at it in the direct and emerse way that it's meant that you should see it. So the Luchos were like that from both sides. So there were the Luchos Rishonos. So the Rebbe says, "V'yadua the shichako." That forgetting, it's a meaning of forgetfulness in general, comes from the back side. It's called from achurai. In other words, why do you forget things? Because your pnimius is not really in it. In other words, that if you were really in it with your whole pnimius, then you wouldn't forget. And that's why, the really great Bali HaTorah, the great Geonim and the other people, why don't they forget? Why do they remember everything? They quote you back like a computer, everything they ever learned, because the Torah is their whole life, ad kidikach, that there's no backside. Their whole pnimis, their whole ponim is only in the Torah. Which means that if you learn the Inif and Torah, what Torah really means to say, the pnimis of it, and the emes message, then you get it in such a way that it remains with you forever. What it means is you forget because you learn the Torah in such a way that it's only like the outer aspect of the Torah. That's not really the emes Amitius Indian of the Torah. You like learning the real side of it, and therefore it doesn't affect you in the way that it's really meant to. It goes in, but it doesn't go in. It doesn't go in completely. And that's the Indian of Achorayim. And therefore the Indian from Shichur comes from Achorayim. What that means, that there has to be an Achorayim. There has to be a Zah level in the Torah which it could be lent to Achorayim. In other words, that there's a trace there that if you come along, you could learn it that way. Oh, if it looks at you cool upon him, the whole Torah looks at whoever looks at it absolutely with cool upon him, then that couldn't happen. And that's what the Gemara means in Eruvin, that the Lukas Rishonis was so high that everything but him was looking you directly in the face, and when you looked at it, you looked also directly only mitzad the Pnimiyah, and therefore it could never be cause any forgetfulness, because there was no part there that could be misunderstood. It was just so clear, so obvious, and the Pnimius was there in such a way that there wasn't an aspect where you could just take it in a surface way, not in a wrong way even, but you could just take it in a way that wasn't the amitius of the Torah, mitzad the fact that you also are not amitius in the Torah, and therefore they were so pnimius that couldn't occur, not mitzad the Makabel and not mitzad the Torah itself. But the Torah, how it's come to us, not mitzad the Lukas HaRishonos, we have to say that it's got a certain trace of Achorayim. Dainu, that there's a certain Indian in the Torah, not that the Torah says things which are not proper, but they came to us in such a way that you could take it a slightly unpnimius way, not in the whole emissaire purpose of it. Why? Because you were also given to a possibility that maybe was the way that you're approaching it. If that's the case, then says the Rebbe, that's what the Gemara meant in Eruvin, that can bring to forgetfulness, because that's what forgetfulness is. Forgetfulness is not really being in it with the ganze flames, mitzad the loimed, and also having got that part of the Torah, which is also not the complete kavanah of the Torah. It's not really ultimately everything it meant, and therefore you can fall into a sort of slipping down from it. It doesn't hold into you, and you don't hold it with the ganze flame. And therefore, that's the Indian von Achorayim. But the Yesha Kulei Ponim, but the Lukas Rishonis were Kulei Ponim, Lezeis Loi Hoya Shichach Klal. There would never have been, there wasn't any Shich at that moment, and there would never have been in all the times to come. So here the Rebbe asks a fascinating kavshia. I said, Vagam, der Isa Bigeros HaKodesh, Dibu HaMaschil, David, Zmiro is Kodesh Lahu. But this is not in the Igeros HaKodesh, well, it's all Igeros HaKodesh. It's in we're going to be learning it too, because we're already learning the last parts of Tanya now. We're running towards Yutis Kislev, but on Yutis Kislev we finished the Tanya and we started all over again. So immediately after Igeros HaKodesh is what's called Kuntres Achrein. Have you ever seen that in Tanya? The final, what do you call it, the latter sheets, Kuntres Achrein. But there the Alter Rebbe writes all sorts of inyonim, which he didn't need to write inside the actual Tanya, because they're like discussions about certain points that came up in certain Kabbalah inyonim that he mentioned here and there in Tanya, and Mela he knows that you might have a big shaila, about those inyonim, so therefore he's miyashiv them with a whole big long arichas habiyah, like sometimes you find in the great Poiskim and the great Meforshim on the Gemara, that they write certain things, and then that there's this little side, or when I say side, a certain issue which comes up which is not shy to the etzem hemshech of that pirush, but it is nogea indirectly to that pirush, and then they write what's called a kuntres achrein. They write a sort of a final sheet which sums up and is miyashev some of those difficulties. Well, that's all in the kuntres achrein. But really, the kuntres achrein in Tanya is part of the Igeros HaKodesh. It's like the part of the last fourth section of Tanya. So therefore, the Rebbe calls it the Igeros HaKodesh, even though it's more exactly, it's kuntres achrein, and it's right at the end of kuntres achrein. That's well known. Diba Maschil David Zemiris Kodesh Lahu. But the Gemara in Masechta Soita, that's a Gemara Masechta Saita, but the Gemara brings over there that David HaMelech, when he was, he was bringing back the, that the Plishtim, they got hold of the Aron HaKodesh. Once they took the Aron HaKodesh out to war against the Plishtim, and the Plishtim captured the Aron. Then eventually they fled and the Eden got it back and so on, the whole thing. And David HaMelech brought it to a certain area, to this fellow called Uzzah, by a fellow called Uzzah. But then he touched the Aron in an incorrect way, without going into the whole story. And he died on the spot because he didn't act honorably, properly to the Aron. So David HaMelech left it there. And then after a while, David HaMelech eventually brought it back and he put it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and so on and so forth. Well, there wasn't a Kodesh HaKadoshim in the Beis HaMikdash, but he put it in a special place that he prepared for it. So it's written that he bought it on an agalah, he bought it on a cart. That at least at the first section, when he brought it from the Plishtim to the place of Uzzah, it was on a cart. Later, when he took it into Yerushalayim, the last part of it was carried on the shoulders of the Leviim. So it's brought down in the Torah that when you carry the Aron with the luchas inside it, it has to be carried by the Bnei Kohos, by the sons of Levi, that they belong to the family called Kohos. I want to say family from the family of Kohos, and they are the ones that have to carry, and they have to carry the Aron Kodesh Dafke on their shoulders. And the fact that David HaMelech brought it on a cart, well, it was like an incorrect action on his part. He shouldn't have done that. So therefore, the Gemara deals with that particular matter over there in Masechta Saita. But also prior to that, it's brought down that David HaMelech, well, he had to flee from Shaul. That Shaul was very angry with him, and he was hidden, or he had to hide, or he was like in a state of almost imprisonment, unable to get out because of the followers of Shaul who were trying to get him. So it's written that he comforted himself, David HaMelech, with the greatness of the Torah, and he was saying Divrei Torah the whole time, and he was encouraging himself with the greatness of the Torah, and he called them Zmiros. He called the words of the Torah Zmiros. Zmiros hoyului li chukecha slicha be'esh mugurai. When I was in my time of fear, pachad, I was hiding, then your words, your chukim, your teachings in Torah were to me like songs. So the Gemara says that for that David HaMelech was punished. And what was he punished? He was punished that he didn't remember that the Leviim should carry the Aron on the shoulders, but he thought he could carry it on a cart. And that was his punishment for having called the words of the Torah songs. As he stated in the Gemara. So the Alter Rebbe says, what's wrong with the fact that he called Divrei Torah songs? And that was what made him feel happy when he was surrounded by all of his enemies that were looking for him. They said, what's wrong with that? So the Alter Rebbe is masbeh over there. What the Gemara means is that when you call Divrei Torah Zmiros, well, that means you're talking about an aspect in Torah which can make a person feel happy. So you might have it in the highest form. You might be tremendously enthusiastic about some very high and pneumatic inyan in Torah. But if you say, "Oh yes, that's what made me happy," I was able to, then that's a sign that in some way you're limiting the Torah, and you're seeing the Torah how it is in a way that it can be taken by a person. Over the Emerson from Torah is absolutely beyond anything we can possibly know, and it absolutely ain't safe, and it's absolutely managed via Lakus, which is completely beyond our understanding. Your simcha has to be on the fact that the Eibush gave us the Torah, or not that you understood certainly in the Torah, and you kocht it, and for them we have simcha, because that's only the Achorayim of the Torah. That's only the outer aspects of the Torah. And since David HaMelech kocht himself only in the outer aspect of the Torah, not in the Emes Ein Sof, and therefore he fell also into a Inyan from Achorayim. What was the Achorayim? Instead of putting it onto the shoulders of the Levim and having them carry it in to wherever it was supposed to go. They only put it on a cart. That was all. Why is that Acharaim? Because they're supposed to carry it. When the Levim carried it, they faced the Aron in such a way. It was, even though they were carrying it on their shoulders, which is Acharaim, but it was really their pneumius towards the actual Aron that they were carrying. Therefore, he also he got nitfus in Azar Inyan that he looked at the Torah only from the Acharaim, as it were, and therefore he made a mistake also in the pneumius and the Acharaim. So the Alter Rebbe says, why do they have to do that to Levim when they're carrying the Torah? So the Alter Rebbe said, because the Torah that was inside the Oren was also Kulei Ponim. The Luchis inside the Oren were Kulei Ponim. So now everybody asks, wait a minute. Well, the Alter Rebbe writes it, and he brings a Yerushalmi to back him up. So everybody asks, wait a minute, what was actually inside the Oren, the Yidden carried in the Oren, it was actually in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Oren, what was in there? The Luchis, but what Luchis were they?
The broken ones.
Both.
Also, the broken ones are also there.
No. The Luchis per se, that were inside the Oren. Which Luchis? The Luchis Shniyos, the Luchis that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down. The broken ones is difference of opinion. Some say that the broken ones were also inside, but they were broken. They were broken, and they were inside just underneath the Luchis Shniyos. Another opinion holds that they weren't inside the Oren, but they were kept in the oil mill. When it was stood up, they were kept on a little sort of a duff outside the Oren Kodesh, not mamish inside the Oren Kodesh, but on a little sort of duff on the outside. The Iki Inu, which was inside the Oren, was the Luchis. The Luchis were the Luchis Shniyos, not the Luchis Rishayim. I feel the Mandoma that the broken Luchis were inside, or the broken Luchis that we just learned. They didn't really have, the Medrash says that the Oishis jumped away from them. So it could be that they were just broken pieces of stone. They didn't really have the Oishis on them either anymore. So the Ikar that was inside the Oren was the Luchis, Achroinois, the second Luchis. So the Alter Rebbe says that they were Kulei Ponim. So if he's Ekumdois, that the Alter Rebbe is saying that even the second Luchis also had that mila, that they were, whichever way you looked at them, they were good. And we're saying no, that the Luchis Achroinos, they already had Achorayim, and therefore the whole Inu was a possibility of Achorayim, was on the Luchis Rishayim that had that. So that's what he asked that Kashya about the Rebbe. And he says, where are we? V'hagam de isha begeras hakodesh dibu amachal David zmirois karislahu. David, you call my Torah songs? Shagam luchis achreinos lo hoya behem ponim v'yochaya. No, they were kulei ponim. Yesh lema de'im lo nishtabru haluchis lo behem achorayim bechinas achorayim klal b'chol ha-Torah. Ava b'luchis achreinos רק בהם לבוד לא יהיה בהם בבחינת אוחר, אבל בכלל התורה יש בחינת פנים ואוחר. אך מה שכתוב, והיא כסוב בפנים ואוחר. So the Alter Rebbe says a push to Torah. The Rebbe Rashab says a push to Torah. And he says that even though the Alter Rebbe appears to hold over there that even the Luchis Achreinis were also cool upon him, he said that was only in the Luchis as they were in the Oren. They were cool upon him. Of in all the rest of the Torah which came out, all the Torah Shabbal Peh, all the Agadatas and all those Inyonim and all those extra Inyonim that came together with the Luchis Achreinis, they weren't cool upon him. In other words, that they had a certain giving of power into them from the Kuliponim, but they themselves weren't mamish Kuliponim. In other words, that in all the Torah, apart from the Seres Adibris on the Luchis, there was a certain trace in the Torah after the Chet HaEgon, even after the giving of the Luchis Achreinis, there was a certain trace. Masha Enkin in the Luchis Rishonos, how much was there? It was only the Luchis Rishonos and Sefer Yeshua B'Vad, according to the Gemara. That was cool upon him. That was all Ponim Bilvad, only Ponim. And Mamela, therefore, the limud over there would have been purely Ponim. In the Luchis Achreinis, only the Luchis had that. And that gave a certain hashpah into the Torah, but it wasn't powerful enough to affect the whole Torah Kulei, that all the rest of the Torah, including all the Agadah and everything we just mentioned, they had a certain trace of Achoraim in them, and he brings a raya from a pasuk. That's a pasuk already in Zechariah. That's a pasuk in Zechariah Novi, that there's another reference to the Torah as a Megillah. It's called in the Inif and Zechariah. That's a whole beginning which you can't go into now. And it's written that that was written Ponim ve. Okay, well that's indicatory of the Torah, and it's written that it had also a certain trace of Ochia. In other words, that was already indicating like the whole Torah, not just the Aserza. And Mamira, that's the Torah that sof kosof there was a certain trace of Achoraim, even though the Luchas Achronis themselves didn't have any according to the Alter Rebbe there. So Gamke Mashaloi Hoya. Well, that's also the other opinion, the other mandoma that we brought, that also mitzad the Luchas Rishonis there would never have been any ability of any goyim to have any effect on Yidden. Shahoyu b'chinas kulei ponim, because the first Luchas were all ponim. It's lo yehoyu shum achiza klal, lo yisholtim klal. In other words, that wherever Yidden relate to Torah and to Kedusha in a way that there's a little trace of Achoraim, then even though it might still be Kedusha, but it's not Kulei Ponim, a little bit Achoraim, then how do you call it, the Klippus and the Liyumase can sort of get a hold in a delicate way. They can sort of make a chap, they can sort of get at it. If it's Kulei Ponim, then they have no place. Well, since in the Luchas Achronis there was a inyan for Achoraim, albeit very delicate, and therefore from then on there was a possibility that the Goyim should be able to chap and have a certain ruling over Yidden, but in the Luchas Rishonos it would never have been Shayach, the whole inyan of any Achizah. It was Kulei Ponim. So of course nobody wants to finish on a slightly negative note, and therefore we say Gam de'achshov gam kein ein lecha ben choyren ela misho eset pach Torah. The Rebbe said that somebody who really learns Torah, then he's a man who is free. What does that mean? He's a ben choyren. The Mishnah in the sixth parak of Pirkei Avos, which means if you really learn Torah, then you're free. Free means that there's no achiza, there's no any achiza of the goyim or the klippers or anything like that. And so that presents it with a kasha of what we just said. So we'll leave you to think about that kasha, and we'll see about it.
How does the Cheta Egel, how does that relate to Moshe striking the rock? Is it connected at all? That
yeah. What I'm saying is that's what they were saying. Bedugma, because it's like that. We also find in the whole relationship of the what do you call the Luchas Rishonos with the Luchas Achronis. What is the Ike Chiddush that occurred through the hitting? There would have been all these inyonim, Agadatas, and there would have been a lot of addition in Torah which we would have had to learn through a lot of effort, but it could be that we would have been able to learn it in a more Chatchila Arivadik way, Afila, with all that. The Chiddush of the Yalkut over there, but again to Moshe Rabbeinu, is that only through sweat and toil and through tremendous effort are you able to come to anything. So that was like a further Yerida. Oh, but they're all connected one with the other. They're all similar in content.
We see even with our Rabbeim, even though there is so much in the Kedusha, they still have all this shtus of governments and of this and of that. With our Rabbeim, like...
Yeah, they ought to deal with governments.
And this and that, but so what's the head?
That's why they could deal with them. Understand? In other words, only they were able to deal with those people, because they were the Emes of B'nai Choyren. And that's what we keep trying to tell all these people around here. If you only let the river run it, if we only let the river run the game, then everything would be different. It's the Emes of Ben Choyren, the Emes is so that the whole Achoraim doesn't affect him, and then everything would just come right immediate. In other words, you've got to let the river run the show. And that's what we have to tell all the so-called the antis. You have to tell them, calm down, you guys, stop worrying, and just let the river run the show. Let what the Rebbe says, let that be said. And not. Eh?
Perhaps.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
He asked a good question. He said the Rebbeim, they were busy with the governments and everything. So I'm answering him that Dafki, they were able to do it. because they were in that Madriga that Lehoya Uma, the Russian Shaletas by.